The following is based on a true story. It was just another quiet evening in Praia da Luz. The McCann family had settled into their routine, dinner with friends at a nearby restaurant, while their 3 children, including 3-year-old Madeleine, slept peacefully in the apartment. Every 30 minutes, Kate or Gerry McCann would check on the kids. But when Kate went back for one last check, her heart stopped. Madeleine's bed was empty. The window was open, and at that moment their relaxing holiday turned into a nightmare that would shock the world. Portugal, 2007. On April 28, 2007, the McCanns arrived at the Praia da Luz for a 7-night spring break. This was the perfect spot for a vacation, with Praia's population of 1,000 people. It was also a much-needed break from their work life and a little get-together with friends. This was the arrangement: Gerry and Kate McCann in 5A, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield in apartment 5B, Jane Tanner and Russell O'Brien in 5D, while the Paynes and Diane Webster were on the first floor. In the first couple of days, the group enjoyed themselves, engaging in vacation activities like playing tennis and tag. These friends were referred to as the Tapas 7. Mornings were filled with the usual routine: breakfast, the kids spending time at the kids club, and parents chatting. However, during breakfast that morning, Madeleine woke up still in her pink pajamas and sleepy-eyed. She asked, "Mum, why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" Kate turned to Gerry in shock. Both parents hadn't heard any noise last night and were alarmed at Madeleine's question. Madeleine brushed over it, and their morning routine continued as usual. By noon, the McCanns headed to the pool for some relaxation, and that's where they took the last photograph of Madeleine, sitting next to her father and 2-year-old sister, Amelie. Around 6 p.m., all children returned to the kids' club, and that evening, the McCanns put the children to bed around 7 p.m. Madeleine was in pink and white pajamas with her blanket and her soft toy, Cuddle Cat. An hour later, they joined their friends for dinner at the Oceans Club. Throughout the evening, the McCanns and friends took turns every half hour checking their kids. Gerry had checked that the children were asleep and tucked them in properly. 1 hour after her husband's check, Kate walks towards their apartment. She goes through the back patio. When she enters the room, her heart skips a beat as she finds the front door wide open. In the same breath, she noticed the twins in their cottage, but something bad had happened. Madeleine was not in her bed, and the window to the room was wide open. There's been a break-in. Kate rushes out of the room and begins shouting, "Somebody's taken her. Madeleine's gone." The McCanns and the 7 desperately search for the missing Madeleine for what seems like forever. Only 10 minutes had passed. At this point, they were getting nowhere, so Gerry sent Matthew to the resort's reception desk. It was time to involve the police. 20 minutes later, the resort activated its missing child search protocol. The search involved 60 staff members and guests. 6 hours later, there was still no sign of Madeleine. The search for Madeleine. Policia Judiciaria, aka PJ, arrived 1 hour past midnight, and after a thorough search that yielded no results, 2 patrol dogs were brought in by 2 a.m. By 8 a.m., 4 search and rescue dogs were deployed. The police believed the culprit couldn't have gotten that far. Law enforcement officers cancelled their leaves and began scouring waterways, wells, caves, sewers, and ruins around Praia da Luz. The lead investigator for this case was none other than Inspector Gonçalo Amaral. They tried their best, but to be honest, their best wasn't good enough, and many people have cited their inefficiency as one of the major reasons why the girl wasn't found quickly. The first responders to Madeleine's disappearance made several errors in what was later known as the golden hours. Take a peek. 1. Descriptions of Madeleine weren't shared with the Marine Police to prevent border crossing. 2. Officers failed to conduct house-to-house searches in the aftermath of the incident. 3. Roadblocks weren't set up until 10 a.m. the next day. It's safe to assume that if there was a culprit, they'd be long gone. 4. The police also failed to request surveillance footage from motorways leading out of Praia da Luz. Basically, any video that could show something out of the ordinary. Euroscut, and apologies for any mispronunciation there, the company responsible for monitoring roads, confirmed that they hadn't been approached for information. This is perhaps the worst one. It took Interpol 5 days to issue a missing person alert. 1,200 miles away from Praia da Luz is Madeleine McCann's home police force, and they've decided to lead the British response team with Constable Matt Baggett. To ensure all-round cohesion, a coordination group known as the Gold Group was also established. The group consisted of SOCA, CEOP, and NPIA. Everyone was stumped. What actually happened? How did it get like this? But the investigators did what they do best: investigate, and that included everyone, and I mean everyone. 9:15 p.m. That night, several minutes before the incident, Jane Tanner, one of the Tupper 7, was interrogated, and she claimed to have seen someone take Madeleine. Shortly after 9 p.m., Tanner left the restaurant to check on her daughter. As she made her way to the apartment, she passed Gerry McCann. Remember, he just finished checking up on his kids. Gerry stopped to talk to a British holidaymaker and returned to the restaurant. But here's the weird thing. Neither Gerry nor the British holidaymaker recalled seeing Tanner. Nonetheless, Jane Tanner claimed that around 9:15 p.m., she noticed a man carrying a small child just ahead of her and walking eastward, away from apartment 5A. This direction was very important to the investigation because, if correct, this person was heading towards the home of Robert Murat, a 33-year-old British-Portuguese resident who lived near 5A. Tanner further described the man as white, with dark hair and 5'7", and of Southern European descent, between the ages of 35 and 40. Kate backed up Tanner's claims, saying she shared this information with her on the night of the incident, but it wasn't released to the media until the 25th of May. Much after the incident, the McCanns created a GoFundMe for Madeleine, leaving no stone unturned to help with the investigation. Madeleine's fund hired a forensic artist to create an image of the first suspect made public by October. But the Portuguese police suspected Tanner was fabricating the sighting, since neither Gerry nor the other man saw her that night, despite her claims of running into them. The streets and hallways are quite narrow, so that wasn't the case. Scotland Yard, officially known as the Metropolitan Police Service for London, was the second to notice that the Tanner sighting was a red herring. Early into their investigation, they identified the man Tanner had seen as a fellow British holidaymaker and not the culprit. According to eyewitnesses, the man was returning to his apartment after picking up his daughter from the Ocean Club night creche. To verify their assumption, Scotland Yard photographed the man wearing clothes similar to those described by Tanner and recreated the pose she'd reported. Everything was an exact match. With Jane Tanner's diversion out of the way, investigators narrowed their sights on a new report. This one was agreed upon by 3 members of the Tupper 7. It was the strongest lead the police had. Robert Murat became the prime suspect in the case, despite being seen by several witnesses, including 3 members of the Tupper 7, Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield. Things got even more interesting when Robert Murat said he never left his home in the first place. Murat claimed he was home all day and had an alibi to corroborate his story: his mother. Nonetheless, from May 15th, 2007, investigation into Murat's case intensified. Let's just say the police took a more hands-on approach. They started by searching his home and draining his pool. They examined his cars, computers, phones, and videotapes. Sniffer dogs were also brought in to scour his garden. Even his friends were brought in for questioning. This was all done to make sure the police left no stone unturned, but not everyone saw it that way. To most people, once a name has been mentioned, they are automatically guilty. Sometime in March of 2008, one of Murat's friend's car was set on fire with the word fala, which means speak in Portuguese. Despite the thorough investigation, no evidence linking Murat to Madeleine's disappearance was found. In April of 2008, Murat received £600,000 in out-of-court settlements, and in July of that year, suspect status was lifted from Murat. His friends were also given £100,000 each. Robert Murat's story isn't over yet, but there's another suspect we haven't discussed, someone you wouldn't quite expect. It was the unsettling notion that perhaps, just perhaps, the parents were the ones responsible. One major hole in McCann's story involved how they entered the apartment when checking on the children. You see, during Gerry McCann's first interview on May 4th, he claimed that he and Kate entered the apartment through the locked front door during their checks at 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. However, in a second interview on May 10th, he claims to have entered through the unblocked patio doors at the back. There was also some confusion about whether the front door had been locked. Furthermore, the Portuguese police also asked why Kate ran to the restaurant when she discovered Madeleine was missing, leaving the twins alone in the apartment. She could have easily used her phone to call, but under panic and duress? Kate had just lost her child. I can't place any blame on her for running back to the restaurant like that. She, did what she thought was best. Another point investigators deliberated upon was whether Madeleine's window could be opened from the outside. It couldn't. So there was no way to gain access externally. Some argued that the windows could be forced open, but there were no signs of forced entry. These discrepancies made the Portuguese police come to conclude that no abduction had occurred. Perhaps Kate's cry was to bolster a false abduction story. With this conclusion, there was a new running theory. Madeleine McCann had died in apartment 5A as a result of an accident, and her parents had hidden her body for a while before transporting it to an unknown location. Roughly 24 hours before the incident, a witness spotted a blonde-haired man across the road, watching the building. This same man was also near the Oceans Club on April 29th and April 30th. More reports of sightings range from seeing a group of men talking, some guys on a balcony, and another man passing by apartment 5A, but none of these reports go further than that. This is where Kate McCann took matters into hands by hiring Daniel Krugel, a former South African police officer who invented a device called the Matter Orientation System. According to Krugel, the handheld device could locate missing persons by using DNA samples and satellite technology. Many people involved with the case doubted Krugel's claims, but decided to give him a try regardless. During the second week of June, the McCanns sent samples of Madeleine's hair and eyelashes. Shortly afterward, Krugels arrived in Praia da Luz and reported that his equipment had detected a static signal in a section of the beach close to the apartment. Here's the thing. Inspector Gonçalo Amaral had also begun to suspect Kate McCann once he saw Krugel on the case. In retort, he reached out to British police seeking assistance. The British responded. After surveying the areas by land and helicopter, Mark Harrison of the British Force, a national search advisor for the UK's crime agency, aka NCA, dismissed Krugel's ideas as nonsense. Instead, Harrison suggested focusing on the beach shoreline, Robert Murat's house, apartment 5A, as well as the Tapas 7 apartments. His final recommendation was to enlist the help of two sniffer dogs, Keela and Eddie. A compact investigation unit arrived on July 31st, 2007 to assist in the investigation of Madeleine McCann. The team consisted of Keela, a forensic investigation dog trained to detect the scent of human blood, and Eddie, an enhanced victim recovery dog specializing in detecting the scent of human remains. The major difference between both dogs was that Keela gave a passive alert by placing her nose near the scent and freezing, while Eddie gave a bark alert specifically for the scent of human remains. Law enforcement officials brought the dogs to various locations, such as the beach and apartment 5A. Surprisingly, both dogs were alerted to a scent behind the sofa and living room. Following this discovery, the Portuguese police obtained warrants to search the McCanns' rented house. The search took place on August 2nd. Eddie and Keela were brought into the apartment and started sniffing around. In a couple of minutes, Eddie alerted to the scent of Madeleine's cuddle cat, but Keela didn't. So, no human blood. Now, here's where things get even more disturbing. 4 days later, on August 6th, the police moved the McCanns, as well as Robert Murat's car, to an underground park with a fairly simple idea in mind: have Keela and Eddie search the vehicles. Murat's car was parked some 20 to 30 feet from the McCanns. Firstly, Eddie was alerted to the scent outside the driver's door of the McCanns' car. Then, Keela also alerted to the trunk of the car. This discovery changed the entire investigation, and almost immediately the Portuguese press began reporting that Madeleine had died inside apartment 5A. Suspect 2, the McCanns. On June 6, 2007, the McCanns became aware of the media's shift in attitude towards them. During a press conference, a German journalist asked, "Have you had any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance?" As you'd imagine, the question disgusted the McCanns, and the conference was over. By June 30th, the Portuguese weekly Sol published a 3,000-word article, "The Madeleine Case, a Pact of Silence." The summary of the article was that there were inconsistencies in McCann's statements and that everything was a huge cover-up. These allegations were further bolstered by the Portuguese press that claimed the Tupper Seven were involved in swinging and had been sedating their children to sleep due to the pact of silence they'd formed. Before long, the McCann case was being talked about in numerous cities. A few months later, she was global. At some point, the appearance of Madeleine's face on a British newspaper was boosting sales by as much as 30,000 copies. She appeared on the cover of People's magazine on May 28, 2007, and even appeared on the front page of several tabloids every day for 6 months. A search for her name on YouTube showed over 3,680 videos and 7 million posts. Fine. Madeleine's case was viral now, the PR was a success, but the kidnapper or murderer was still at large. However, the British police didn't fully embrace the possibility that Madeleine had died, though the idea was widespread. They needed to be certain. So they collected hair and other fibers from areas in apartment 5A where Keela and Eddie alerted. Then these samples were sent to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in Birmingham. On August 8th, the McCanns were summoned to a meeting by the Portuguese police. Guilhermino Nassau, the PJ regional director, informed the McCanns this had become a murder investigation. Both Kate and Gerry McCann were questioned for hours, to no avail. When the DNA test results came in, the report indicated that 15 out of 19 markers matched Madeleine's DNA in the car boot. However, the reporter also said the results were too complex for meaningful interpretation, quote-unquote. In a turn of events, the Portuguese were offering Kate a deal. They suggested that she admitted that Madeleine had died accidentally in their apartment and that she hid the body. They'd make her face only a 2-year sentence, but her husband would be free and allowed to leave. Their lawyer instructed them not to speak. Despite this, Gerry chose to answer questions while Kate chose not to respond to 48 questions. The interview lasted 11 hours. On screen is a list of questions Kate McCann decided not to answer that day, and you can pause to take a look. That was the sound of a news leak. The news headlines read, "DNA evidence reported as 100% match," quote unquote, and "corpse in McCann car," quote unquote. According to one source, these leaks were directly from the Portuguese police. The following day, Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida of the Portuguese police finalized a 9-page report with some pretty bold claims. 1. Madeleine had accidentally died in apartment 5A. 2. The McCanns and their friends had come up with a good cover-up story and faked the abduction. And 3. The Tapa 7 were misleading the police with their reports. On September 11, an additional 11-page analysis from the Information Analysis Brigade in Lisbon scrutinized alleged major holes in McCann's statements. The case ran for several months. The new charges against the McCanns were abduction, child abandonment, homicide, and concealment of a corpse. To escape this hole they found themselves in, they would require some special help, and they got it. The McCanns hired private investigators. The McCanns' initiative to hire private investigators paid off when reports of 4 independent sightings from North Africa surfaced. According to one report, a Norwegian woman had seen a girl resembling Madeleine at a gas station near Marrakesh on May 9th. The child asked her companion, "Can we see Mummy soon?" Now, said witness then contacted Spanish police, but 1 month later, she still wasn't interviewed. When Kate McCann heard about this, she was very disturbed. It meant the PJ were not following up on crucial leads. God knows how many leads must have gone through them without it being checked out. In 2008, Madeleine's fund hired Oakley International, a detective agency based in Washington. This was a 6-month investigation costing about £800,000. Oakley sent a 5-man team led by Henry Exton, a former British police officer with experience at MI5. The team would conduct undercover operations with the Ocean Club and pedophile rings across the Roma community. The search efforts from the Portuguese and the British were quite thorough. Some of their best minds worked the case, yet there was no headway. Fast forward 3 years later, Scotland Yard initiated one final search, Operation Grange. In May 2011, under Home Secretary Theresa May, a new investigative review was opened called Operation Grange. This involved a team of 29 detectives and 8 civilians, led by Commander Simon Foy, with Chief Inspector Andy Redwood. By 2013, it was a full-blown investigation once more. The team undertook extensive work, translating tens of thousands of documents, releasing an age-processed image of Madeleine, and investigating over 8,000 potential sightings. By 2015, they had taken 1,300 statements, collected 1,000 exhibits, and scrutinized 650 offenders. By 2019, the total cost of the inquiry was a whopping £11.75 million. Moreover, Operation Grange employed mobile phone tracking to trace calls and texts near the scene. Despite crossing off interests and multiple leads, Operation Grange was getting nowhere. But there's one final suspect we should get to. His name? Christian Bruckner. In more recent times, German prosecutors announced that they had concrete evidence that Christian Bruckner was responsible for Madeleine's abduction and murder. You see, Bruckner was a convicted sex offender and had been living around the resort at the time. In May of 2023, German prosecutors conducted a search that showed Bruckner's phone was in the vicinity around the time of Madeleine's disappearance. However, Bruckner wouldn't be leaving prison anytime soon, as he was already serving time for the rape of a woman in Portugal, a prison sentence of 15 years. Nonetheless, Bruckner was the new prime suspect. To this day, we still don't know what exactly happened to Madeleine. Some factions of the internet believe all parents were involved. One Twitter user believes they had to be involved because they could easily have gotten a nanny to put their children in a creche. Some believe it was Matthew Oldfield, Kate's friend, who went to check on the kids by 9:30 p.m. The police believe the culprit is Bruckner. More recent investigations reveal a new name, but law enforcement has refused to release the name to the public. One theory that isn't quite brought up is the fact that Madeleine, almost 4 at the time, might have left the apartment by herself, wandered off, interrupted a burglary, and then abducted. Earlier that day, resort staff had left a note in a message book at the reception area. The note mentioned that the children were asleep in the apartments. Some people believe that it's very likely that the abductor read this letter. Several days before her disappearance, multiple witnesses reported seeing men behaving oddly near apartment 5A. These accounts initially led the Portuguese police, as well as Scotland Yard, to suspect plans for an abduction or burglary. You see, between January and May 2007, the rates of burglaries in the area had increased tenfold. 17 days before Madeleine went missing, 2 incidents had occurred in that area. In both cases, burglars gained entry through windows. So it was thought maybe it was a burglary turned kidnapping. But sadly, we'll never know the true events of what happened that night. Meanwhile, in response to the defamatory reports about them, the McCanns and the Tapas 7 took legal action against several newspapers, all of which were settled in donations and monetary consolations. In May of 2023, I got this photograph of Amelie at a vigil for Madeleine, causing the McCanns to issue a public statement urging the media to respect their children's privacy. This note is from Kate and Gerry. It's 17 years since Madeleine was taken from us. It's hard to even say that number without shaking our heads in disbelief. Whilst we are fortunate in many ways and able to live a relatively normal and enjoyable life now, the living in limbo is still very unsettling, and the absence still aches. Your support continues to encourage us and bolsters our strength to keep going. We know the love and hope for Madeleine and the will to find her, even after so many years, remains, and we are truly thankful for that. Thank you again for remembering Madeleine and all the missing children. Kate and Gerry.